Hi, everybody. Great to be here again. Holly, thanks so much. Always love your intros. Super excited to be here today. Elizabeth introduced to the HCI webcast family with me, so we're going to have some fun. Especially this time of year, right? This is something I love talking about sort of as we close out the year. A lot of us are probably seeing, it's inevitable, right? Lands in our inbox, the end of year trend reports. Right. So we're going to take a little bit of a different take on that today. So hopefully you noticed that when you signed up for today's webcast, but we've got some fun in store. Like I said, if you're familiar with Kazoo, I think we do have a few customers sort of in the audience today, you know that we absolutely geek out on everything related to the employee experience. We're constantly researching this stuff, but also sort of helping various organizations with theirs. And every now and then, as part of that, we get some really great HR leaders sort of in our orbit, and Elizabeth has been one of those lately. She's worked on a few projects with us, so I was super excited when we got to start working with her, but kind of a little bit, got the tinglies to be able to host this with her today. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me for this particular webcast. Super excited that you're here.
Yeah, thanks, Skylar, Holly. So happy to be here.
So just a quick sort of overview. We are basing today's talk, like I mentioned, on a lot of those trend reports that you see that are coming at the end of the year. So real quick, we want to touch on that. What are the kinds of things that we're seeing for the 2020 trend sources that are coming out? But from that, we want to get into what we're calling the anti-trends for 2020. We'll touch more on what that means in a little bit. But given those, we don't want to just sort of talk openly about things that could be for 2020. We want to give you a little bit of short and long-term advice, maybe some actions that you can write down sort of in the moment today. It might be some aha moments for you, and maybe some things that you can take and sort of integrate into your people programs going into 2020. Time permitting, we'd love to get to as many questions as we can. So like Holly said, feel free to jot anything down in that questions area. All right, let's get started. Just to sort of set up the topic, again, sort of looking out this time of year, I hope that we've all sort of seen it, right? The trend reports that sort of land in our inbox this time of year, maybe various analyst firms have done, sort of surveyed the field, right? And they're sort of giving their guesses on what's coming. I love talking about it because when we sit down with other organizations about this, sometimes it's sort of, it's like kind of an eye roll, right? Like, oh, okay, that sounds great, but not like my organization's ever going to do some of that stuff. Or sometimes it's actually a little bit of panic almost. It's like, wow, we just spent, the last year or two or a ton of resources getting our programs in this particular sort of area. But now this trend is saying that everything is about to change. Well, hopefully we'll sort of calm those fears a little bit today if you're in that boat. But, before we get into that, I just wanted to, Elizabeth, you actually worked on us for some of this, and who's making some of the predictions? Like, who did you sort of research or look at when, preparing some of the content for today?
Well, we started with one data point from Gallup, the global leader really in workplace research. And this was from a 2018 report. Gallup told us that employee engagement is at an all-time high, at least in the U.S. right now. And it's notable here to mention that it's still well under 40% engagement. So there's still a lot of work that we have to do, but we are at a high compared to years past. So from there, we just started talking about, well, why is that? What if we're at an all-time high in employee engagement right now on average? What are we doing that's working? What are we doing that's working that we need to keep doing? And so from there, we just looked at what some of their experts are saying from, that future of work hashtag can clue you into a lot of information that's being put out there. We talked to people at Future Workplace from the Burson Academy, lots of experts, and then I brought in some of my own personal consulting stories with real live clients, and so we'll get to talk about that a little bit too today.
Yep, I put talentality and kazoo on the slide because I figured you wouldn't. Elizabeth's too humble. But yeah, in talking to her about this before today's discussion, it's true. She does get to work with a lot of organizations, seeing sort of what they've tried, what they want to change, and you start to see some patterns emerge. We see it too. We work with hundreds of organizations, and it's they clearly know what they want to change, but then we sort of get to help them do that, but then see what sorts of successes they're seeing on the other side. So we're trying to match those kinds of insights with, again, what the sort of experts and analytics firms are saying for their own trends. And from that, though, is this project Elizabeth worked with us on that I'm super excited about. It's our 2020 anti-trends. Again, sometimes these trend reports sort of elicit a little bit of an eye roll, right? Like that seems a little bit far-fetched, or sometimes a little bit of panic. Again, like we committed ourselves to a certain strategy, and are you saying that within the next 5 years, all of that's about to be thrown out the window? We don't think that's the case. So in light of the year's sort of batch of trends and trend reports, we wanted to present our 2020 anti-trends. These are sort of things that hold off on pushing the panic button. Here's some things that you can do, or a sort of lens that you can put on your approach to your existing people programs, to your existing strategies that are really tried and true, and will also put you on the sort of path to success or the KPIs that these trends are talking about. So we put all of that into a 2020 anti-trends report that's actually launching right now as we speak, I think just a few minutes ago. So everyone here today is going to sort of hear some of the content for the first time. We're going to dig into 4 of them, and then watch your inbox afterwards. We'll follow up with the full report. You can see everything Elizabeth researched and dug into on all of the anti-trends. So can't wait to get into that. Did I miss anything there, Elizabeth?
No, you summed it up very nicely.
Awesome. Well, again, I've seen it myself. Can't wait for others to sort of dig in and see sort of our take on one of these year-end reports. Before we jump in to the anti-trends, though, I did want to throw out a quick poll. The title of this is that the workforce is changing, and we've mentioned a couple times that we get to work directly with organizations to improve their people programs or take on some of these challenges. So I'm going to put up a poll right now. Before we look at the content, I'm sort of curious, just gut check from people listening, what area of your organization needs help the most? We're going to put a few answer choices up on the screen. Is it recruiting? Like you feel like you're sort of caught up in that war for talent? Your HR tech, you need it to do more and better. Those are good things. Culture, people aren't engaged, or just everything. Look at that number for everything. Jumping out.
Wow. Recruiting, yes, not surprised. Unemployment, super low right now.
All right, everything. Okay. Surprise.
Culture's jumping in there.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that, especially for the everything people. I think you're in, excuse me, I think you're in for a real treat today. We are going to touch, stay tuned, because we are going to touch sort of on all these areas in both the trends and anti-trends that we end up digging into. So with that said, let's jump back in and look at our 4 anti-trends for 2020. We're going to look at first some of the overall trends that you were seeing, Elizabeth, when sort of doing your research and looking at the various trend reports that were out this year. Then we want to present our anti-trend to that. And given that sort of framing, we'd love to, again, give you some short and long-term advice. So jumping right in, trend number 1, we labeled it "In Data We Trust." Elizabeth, when you were sort of doing this research, what sort of stood out to you to just summarize it this way?
Yeah, so everyone is talking about data right now, and I don't know what you call it in your organization. You could hear HR data, HR analytics, HR metrics, people analytics. There's all these different names, but it's all talking about the same thing, and that is the fact that we have access today to data that we just did not have access to 20, 10, even 5 years ago. And having the access to that data is helping us to make better business decisions. And so it's really just getting at the whole idea that the world around us is changing so rapidly. Technology has really never advanced as quickly as it has in the past decade or two. And it's really informing the way that organizations have to adapt to it in order to survive and thrive. And data is a really big way that organizations are doing that, just having the access and being able to use it.
Yeah, this one seems pretty straightforward. I love talking to some of our organizations about this, though, because, data, it's, almost buzzwordy at this point, right? We see it. We've probably been seeing it in trend reports for quite a few years. But in talking to especially like mid to smaller size organizations, when you bring it up, there's that perception that we need sort of a data team or data scientists, and we don't have that on hand right now. So, we're sort of left out. We're sort of on the outside looking in about this sort of big data revolution, right? And that's not really the case, I don't think. So, yeah, in light of that, like given that we've had that conversation a few times with people, our anti-trend here is to keep measuring what matters, right? And what do you sort of mean by that anti-trend, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, Skylar, in what you just mentioned. Smaller organizations now can really compete with data in the same way that larger organizations have done in the past. And that just means that, we've always measured sales, right? Revenue and basic expenses and all of that. But now with technology that exists, we have access to HR data so that we can measure our people programs. And like you were saying, we don't need a resident statistician on hand anymore like we might have needed 30 years ago. There are lots of tech companies, online platforms that we can use to crunch those numbers, collect the data, and even deliver back to us meaningful insights to help us with our decision making. So we don't have to be the statistician or the number crunching expert anymore. We can leverage technology so that we can focus on the people part of our business.
Yeah, we have it on screen here, how it's so readily available these days, and you don't have to, really mine a ton of spreadsheets or, again, like hire sort of external firms. We work with people to sort of modify their recognition and rewards, for instance. And there's your baseline stats about how people are using it, but sometimes it's sort of a light bulb moment for people that we talk to, how, if you see some patterns within who's being recognized or who's being rewarded, for instance, that's giving you some great critical insights on the employee engagement side that they sort of just weren't thinking about, but it was sort of right there under the surface in the recognition and rewards platform or program that, again, you already sort of had at your fingertips, right?
Yep, exactly.
So what can we do here, right? Given that the anti-trend, keep measuring what matters, we have some short-term and long-term advice sort of related to that. In short-term, again, it might feel sort of straightforward, but it's a conversation we keep having over and over with people. If you're not already doing this, like master measuring the big three that we have on the screen here. We have turnover, absenteeism, and engagement. Chances are a lot of you have that in a sort of quarterly report that gets spit out, or maybe you're monitoring it month to month. That'd be great. But what do we mean by sort of mastering that, right? Are we going just beyond the number, Elizabeth?
Well, yeah, I'll answer that, and this flows really nicely into the long-term approach too. When I think mastering, it really starts with just tracking the data. It's one thing to measure something, to know that a number exists somewhere out there, but to really pay attention to any spikes or dips in that metric over time is where the magic really happens, because then you can use it to inform decisions, which is what matters at the end of the day. And so I love starting small. I'm a huge proponent of proponent of just starting with those first three really basic metrics: turnover, absenteeism, and engagement. Most people in the HR space, we probably know what they are, but studies show that most organizations still aren't really using them to make decisions. So in the long term, we're just saying, don't stop there. Don't stop just with the measuring. Measure, track, pay attention, and really use what the data is saying to inform your business decisions.
Absolutely. A couple of things jump out to me. For the people who answered everything in that first poll, right? Sometimes the frustration is there's so much we want to do and improve. Where do we start? And again, the short-term advice, if you have just like a baseline with these numbers, it's pretty easy to go see, are you seeing sort of slight spikes? Are you seeing a little bit of a rise, a little bit of a dip in one of these three? That's an excellent area to just scratch a little bit. And chances are, just under the surface, you'll find some great things you can dig into related to the employee experience that are affecting those sort of numbers that you can master, or the sort of short-term numbers that we're talking about there. The other thing is that, oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll add to that briefly for everyone who said that everything, that you need help in every area. That's completely understandable. We've all been there. Obviously, you can't do everything at once. And so if you do start using data to track where you are in your effectiveness with hiring, training, development, whatever it is, it will point you in the right direction to start in the most urgent area, because you can really only start in one place. So the numbers don't lie, as they say. The data will reveal what's most important right now and what can maybe wait and be number 2 or 3 on the priority list.
Yep. And my last thing there is, if it does seem straightforward that you should be measuring these things, the next conversation we sometimes have with people, which isn't as obvious, is that there's also that frustration of, okay, we've got these numbers, or I'm on the front lines and I know that this area of our sort of culture of recruiting needs work, but it's really hard for me to make that business case or sort of get approval or investment, make that decision at a higher level in the organization. If you're, mastering how you sort of look at and measure these numbers, the business case is right there, right? You can bring data to that conversation and make it a lot easier to sort of, get approval or make changes for the better. Okay. Number 1 down. I want to jump into trend number 2 then. This is one that was really sort of eye-opening for me. I love that the conversation we had leading up to today about it. We've labeled it Z-shaped skills in the workplace. And prior to this conversation or this piece of content you worked on with us, Elizabeth, I knew all about T-shaped, right? If you haven't been using that phrase for the past decade or so, it's worth sort of a quick Google, like T-shaped skills. But now we're talking Z-shaped. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, this is a term coined just this year, actually, by Jean Meister. She's an advisor with Future Workplace. A lot of us probably follow her on Twitter. She's an author. She writes for Forbes. And it was in a Forbes article, actually, in the spring, I believe, where she started talking about Z-shaped skills. And it's this whole idea of reskilling so that we're adapting to the world around us that we were just talking about is changing so much. So this is a great follow-up to the data conversation, because data and technology are really changing the world around us. And in response to that, we really need to be reskilling ourselves and our workforces in order for individuals and organizations to be successful. So you can see on the image here the three different elements that Meister's talking about in the Z-shaped phrase are soft skills, which are more important than ever in 2019 because we're working in a very collaborative, knowledge-based economy versus the industrial economy of the past. The business and digital literacy. Oh, go ahead.
Just as a quick note there on the soft skills, we label it soft skills here on the visual, but I think in the piece itself, you call out what she meant. I think she called it the 5 C's. So just as you stare at this visual by soft skills, there's a lot in there, but the five C's that she calls out: collaboration, critical thinking, change management, communication, and cultural fluency. If you open the piece after today, you'll sort of see those spelled out and you'll be able to dig into that a little more. But that's what we mean. Those are some of the ones that we mean by soft skills, just on that visual. Sorry to bust in there.
No, that's a really good clarification. It's hard to fit all of those words onto the image, but
Turns out.
That's a good question for soft skills. So yeah, then moving on to the business and digital literacy. I mean, again, to throw back to the data and technology that we just talked about, if data is so important, then we have to be able to work with it. People have to be able to use it. The data on its own means nothing, but it means everything if people are using it in really effective ways. And so being literate, as they say, with kind of business at a higher level rather than one specialized function, and then being able to use data. And finally, creativity. Innovation is very important. I think it was LinkedIn this year that named creativity as the most wanted job skill right now by employers, the #1 skill, because we live in a different economy than we have, again, and innovation is key. So in order for individuals and organizations to be successful in the future, we need some kind of combination of all 3 of these types of skills named on the screen there.
Yeah, and no one can see me, but I'm sort of nodding along vigorously. And like I said, this one really stood out to me from the piece and from your research and those discussions with the future of work thought leaders, because I think just to bring the sort of visual home, I think we've all been on those teams, right, where you sort of have that one leader or that one kind of superstar on the team that not only takes care of his or her, the bullet points that they're responsible for, but is just really adept at gathering the data, for instance, but then being able to communicate it effectively across different departments, or being able to get creative with, how this particular program is kind of rolled out or adopted by employees. And we just sort of write it off as like, wow, we got lucky that person's on the team or that they have those particular skills. When you take it apart this way and look at it as these sort of axes of, creativity meshing with that business and digital literacy, but also these soft skills that allow them to kind of communicate it and have it be received by the organization well, it's not necessarily that person's just some sort of unicorn, right? That we just got lucky that they're on our teams. So I love that this trend called out the importance of this, because I think we've all worked with that person. Hopefully a lot of us are those people. That'd be great. Shout out to those people. But it leads to sort of the anti-trend here, right? Should we panic if we don't think that there's those people on our teams? Not necessarily, because the good news is, those things we just had on those sort of axes of the Z working together, those things can be learned. So our anti-trend here is to continue prioritizing L&D at your company. Having looked at the research myself, I know a ton of us are already investing in L&D in some aspect. So you probably already have a program in place or maybe even resources for it. Right now, it's more important than ever. But to give a little bit of advice for what we can do related to that, on the short term, protect that funding for employee development, right? Maybe take a look at what you have. And some of that L&D might be more sort of compliance related or for a very specific, maybe technical skill, which is great that people are learning that. But are you affording or sort of making room within that program or within that budget to address some of those things that you just saw on the Z? So protect that funding, right? And allocate some of that budget for things like maybe conferences, books, like we have on the slide right here, webinars, like places that people can sort of learn things related to those areas, right?
Yep. Yeah, so important. And I'll add to that, to go back to the data one more time, that is what you can use just on a practical level to protect the funding, because when you're doing that, when you're talking budgets, then what we have to do is speak budget language. We can't use learning and development language to protect the money that we need to be able to have those programs, we have to use the business language. And so when we can make a business case for our learning and development by sharing with the executive team or whoever it may be what the return on that investment is, what it looks like, then that'll help us out a whole lot and help us get more money to use to have the kind of programs that we want to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then I'll keep going with the long term unless you have anything else to add there, Skylar, for the funding part.
No, let's hear it. Yeah, we're flowing right along.
Yeah. So I love, Skylar, that you mentioned just a couple minutes ago that all of these things are learned skills. They're not skills that most of us are just born with, or maybe some of us are, maybe we have one or two, but regardless of that, they are learned, which is why reskilling is such a buzzword right now, but it's so important. And to be quite honest, reskilling could have been its own trend that we talked about here today. It's this whole idea that with the world changing around us, we can't just rely on other people, other organizations, universities maybe, to deliver these perfectly qualified job candidates to our doorsteps. That's not happening, and we can't wait for that to happen. We really have to take the initiative ourselves as HR leaders and business leaders to develop the skills in our people that we really need for their sake and for ours, for the organization. So we can do that in the long term by redesigning jobs. It might look like creating some shadowing opportunities so that there's frequent mentorship happening to get those soft skills that the young new hire hasn't had a chance to learn yet. It might look like some new side projects. Google is doing this right now really well. They are actually giving their people 20% of their time back to work on a side hustle that doesn't have to have anything at all to do with Google, which is huge. They're doing that to foster creativity and give freedom so that innovation happens. And maybe not all of us can do that or even needs to do it exactly like that, but it's one idea of thinking outside the box and making sure that we're really putting our money where our mouth is and saying creativity is important to us, and this is how we're proving it to you. This is how we're fostering it in you. Soft skills are important to us, and this is how we're going to help you continue acquiring them down the road for the long term for everyone's benefit.
Exactly. It sends such a strong message to the culture, to sort of everyone at the organization when you're leading out and providing these kinds of examples. The other thing I'll say, having had conversations about L&D with a few people, is that, it's easy for this to sound a little bit sort of pie in the sky, or like, we'll never be able to modify our sort of L&D programs for soft skills. I'll never be able to make that pitch. But what I tell those people is let's go look at what the data is saying, right? And you might have maybe some low adoption of your existing L&D, or awareness is low, or the feedback you're getting is that, yeah, I'll participate in it, but it feels sort of obligatory. I'm not really motivated to do this. Well, guess what? If you sort of survey, maybe do like a pulse survey of those employees and see what they would like to be added to some of these programs, maybe as an additional module, or maybe as some of the examples you see on the screen here of things that you can add to your L&D budget or your L&D efforts, the employees really start to light up, because yes, some of them do identify that I wish I was better at, public speaking or collaboration or things that sort of fit underneath those soft skill labels. And then again, when you're adding those things to your L&D, you're aligning them with the things that motivate your actual employees. And that's sort of a salve for the L&D budgets we're already using, either going to waste or not seeing the participation that we want, right? So that's kind of the discussion we sort of often have there when changing L&D in this way comes up.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. And while you were talking, I was thinking about everyone who mentioned recruiting in the poll a few minutes ago. And how hard it is right now. It's not surprising at all to see that that's a really big challenge in the workplace right now for everyone, because unemployment's so low. There's more jobs available than there are people. And so one really strategic way to think about this, and also a concrete way to think about learning and development and using it for our advantage, is to think, okay, well, if we can't recruit someone who's already qualified for the job, then could we possibly recruit someone who's almost qualified for the job, maybe even at a lower salary, maybe a less experienced person than we're used to filling that position with, but then use the rest of that salary budget to invest in training them to get where they need to be. So we can use learning and development for the employees that we have, but also to help us with other challenges like recruiting entirely new people.
Totally. All right, love it. Z-shaped skills, keep that one in mind. Again, very closely related to, the L&D that we're probably, a lot of us are already investing in. So with Z-shaped skills in mind, let's move to trend number 3, also Z-related. The label we have here, goodbye millennials, hello Gen Z. What does goodbye millennials mean? Are they all retiring, Elizabeth?
Well, unfortunately not. I am a millennial myself. I can tell you I'm not retiring anytime soon, but there is a big shift happening, and it is actually in conjunction with millennials aging and moving into more leadership positions, more areas of expertise, and really freeing up all these more entry-level positions for the next generation, which is Gen Z. The conversation has shifted this year, especially because this year is the first time that the oldest Gen Zers entered the workforce or graduated college, if they went to college. So they're 22-ish, and they're coming full force into companies all over the country. And so we're discovering that, okay, wow, Gen Z actually has different preferences than millennials did, different values, different expectations of their employers. And of course they do. They're different people, and they grew up in a different time with different experiences. So I'll note here that it's so easy to overgeneralize. We are speaking generally. It's, of course, individuals are different, and just because you're part of a generation doesn't mean that you have the exact same qualities as everybody else in that generation. And the line is, it's not black and white, like if someone's 6 months older than you, but in a different generation, then they're gonna have all these different qualities. But for the most part, millennials and Gen Z are different, just different types of people, different preferences, and they're different from baby boomers who are millennials' parents' age, and it goes on. And so the trend here is just being aware of this shift that's fairly new because the Gen Zers are coming onto the workforce right now.
Yep. When this conversation came up, 2 things stuck out to me. One was that it was surprising. I don't know if this is getting enough coverage, but yeah, the oldest millennials are about to hit their 40s. I don't know that there's that much realization that the sort of top level of the generation is already sort of that established. Maybe in their careers, certainly, age-wise, if nothing else. And the reason that seems shocking is because, oh my gosh, it feels like we just spent the last decade, obsessing over millennials, right? Like the other part of the conversation here is we're all, maybe a lot of us are experiencing millennial fatigue, having had this conversation so many times over the last 5-10 years in the workplace. So this comes up as a trend. Is it a big eye roll moment? Like, oh, here we go again. We have to, change everything because we did all this prep work for millennials in the workforce, and now it's time to sort of repeat the process, right? And we're saying no, like our anti-trend here is don't ignore those generational differences ever. But really, I want to sort of point out that if you are experiencing millennial fatigue, maybe the glass half full there is that you've started to become, a lot of us started to become really aware of those generational differences in our workplace, maybe changing our strategies a little bit because of that. Well, don't stop doing that. It's just apply some of those same sort of tactics or keep that awareness up now that the sort of generational shift is happening again within the workplace. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. It is funny to me too, just like you were saying, just the national obsession over millennials the past few years. And I can definitely imagine some eye rolls happening with new Gen Z articles, but it doesn't change the fact that we just have to know our people. And I think that as HR leaders, that's something that we're good at anyway, is we want to know what motivates our people, what helps them to develop and get better, and being aware of generational differences can help so much because there's just so much research out there saying, hey, if you have 10 new people that you're hiring this year in a certain age range, then maybe be aware of these qualities and how they're different from the other people in your workplace so that you're able to motivate them and keep them happy to keep them on your team.
And if that sounds like a tall task, like that, that awareness or sort of digging into those differences, well, we've got you covered. Because what can we do related to this anti-trend of being aware of generational differences, right? Well, in the short term, you already identified a great, I think, shortcut for, getting started of the generational difference awareness of those, especially as Gen Z comes in. We have a few of them on screen here, but you cover it a little more in the anti-trends piece that we just published. One thing to read is a book, Generations at Work, Managing the Clash of Boomers, Gen X, Millennials in the Workforce. If you want to dig in a full book, there's a great TED Talk out there. It's a Millennials proposal for happy multi-generational workplace. Sounds like it's right on the nose. And yeah, if nothing else, go pull up this Forbes article real quick. It's called How to Manage Generational Differences. The point being, in the short term, these can already give you an awesome sort of frame of mind or lens on how to, increase your awareness of this. Maybe you already have some, but you sort of want to clean up how that's being reflected in your programs or your people and culture team. These are some great resources for getting started in the short term.
Yep. Yeah, there's so many great resources out there to take advantage of just to help us stay aware of how generations are different from each other. And we can also create programs ourselves at work. And the word programs can be a little scary sometimes, like it's this big movement or something, but it doesn't have to cost anything. It doesn't have to be anything official, or it can be. The idea behind this is, in the long term, being aware of how many different generations might be in our workforces. People are living longer, working longer now, and so right now you probably have a Gen Zer, a millennial, a baby boomer, and maybe even is an oldest person in your workforce. So that's 4 different people who might be motivated differently and communicate in different styles. So pairing them up to learn from each other can be very important and valuable. Skylar, you can speak a little bit more to this, but you guys at Kazoo, you have some frequent open communication forums to assist with this. Is that right?
Yeah, this one really hit close to home for me when I saw your piece, because it might sound weird, right? Or at least it does to me. What if one day we send an email to the whole organization that says, new cross-generational work together program starting up, right? That's what's going on? But we had already started doing something here as the company grew, where we identified that a lot of people were moving into management positions for the first time. So either first-time managers or first few years. And what we wanted to do was sort of have monthly, sort of trainings or discussions where we bring especially mid-level management together, surface feedback that the company's been getting about certain topics, and or allowing people sort of an open forum for things that are happening on their teams. And what was just sort of happening organically is that people who've had a lot of experience were, sharing that with first-time managers, people in their first few years. But the other thing was that those first-time managers were also giving unique perspectives that some of the older managers who've maybe been locked in sort of their way of thinking for a long time hadn't been thinking, right? And so again, that's not a program that we labeled, cross-generational, we must work together. But in creating a program like that, getting a little creative with it, we sort of organically created something that allowed these generational differences to be closed a little bit, because there's, a big age gap in the room, but everyone is allowed to sort of unify under one topic and work together that way. So these kind of cross-generational programs can exist in creative ways like that, and in ways that, don't sound sort of weird, right?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great way to do it.
Well, number 4 already. The 4th trend we wanted to dig into is this one called Consumerization of the workplace. This is maybe my favorite, if I'm being honest, because it's, one that I really hadn't been thinking about at all sort of going into this, but it really struck me as true. What's the consumerization of the workplace? What do you mean there?
So this is talking about the idea that as HR leaders today, more and more, we also have to be good marketers. And this one was fun for me too, because I actually have a marketing background earlier in my career before I crossed over to the more HR or organizational side. And so I love being able to wear both hats at the same time. It's really fun, and it's becoming more and more important. And this is stemming out of, I think we've all heard employer brand, another big buzzword right now, but also very important. It's meaningful, means a lot. Employer brand is the perception that people have of your organization as an employer. So the consumer brand, of course, would be how do people perceive your business or organization when they want to buy something. The employer brand means how do people perceive it as a place to work. And because of those recruiting challenges that came up during that first poll, I think it's pretty obvious we have to make our workplaces very appealing to the workforce, because we need top talent in order to be successful. So this is the whole idea of HR leaders putting their marketing hats on and being able to really sell our organizations and our teams as a great place to work so that we can get the talent that we need.
Yep. And again, it's funny, since this conversation came up and we've been digging into it, I've had a conversation with one of our global HR leaders, and she almost said this word for word. She almost had this same realization of sort of looking back at how they're recruiting or how their programs have changed, how she's had to, essentially put on her marketing hat when it comes to this stuff. But really, we don't want it to sound scary. We don't want to make it sound like, oh, I've got to go back to school and, sort of get a marketing degree in addition to all the other stuff we're juggling, right? Like, our anti-trend here is, if you are in that war for talent, everyone who sort of answered recruiting at the top of the webinar, you're probably already looking into ways to innovate your recruiting efforts, or maybe you've made some slight changes semi-recently. That's what we wanted to zoom in on. Continue to innovate on the recruiting front, especially right now, as Elizabeth touched on, like during times where unemployment is this low. Hopefully we've heard it over and over. Like, employees have their choice of where they want to go. It's sort of an employee's market, right? So what are we doing to market the positions that we have open, to market our organization so that people want to come here? And we've got some advice related to that, right? So I love this one because it's so simple. If this sort of recruiting thing is a big frustration for people, in the short term, start with a hard look. step out of your bubble of being in your culture and your organization day to day, and take a hard look at things like your careers page, Glassdoor reviews, social media presence, the referral programs that you have up. Again, take that look sort of outside of your bubble, like from the perspective of a potential recruit or someone who might join your organization. Are these things working together to tell a great story about your organization, to make it look like a place that they want to join? If not, again, sometimes just that base level of sort of awareness that our existing recruiting efforts aren't working together this way is an awesome place to start in the short term to, again, this is maybe what we should focus on right now, or sort of apply our marketing hats to, right?
Yep. Yeah, that is really good. And I think most of us can do better at the story that we're telling in our job postings on those careers pages. And I would really, if we're looking for one practical step, I would boil it all down to start thinking about your employee experience the same way that we've been thinking about our customer experience for years. People have been talking about customer experience, and it's so important because we have to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and really understand what they're experiencing. So we have to get better at doing that with employees as well, and not just customers. So going back to what you were just saying, Skylar, with looking at your careers page, you need to start by reading it and saying, okay, how is a potential employee really experiencing this page? Is it just a list of job responsibilities and kind of features about the job, or is it really tying what someone's looking for and the benefits they're looking for in a job? And I don't mean benefits like 401k. I mean the value that they're looking to experience in their work. Is it bridging that gap and really sending the message that you are what they're looking for? So that's what we can do in the long term, is start thinking about the employees that we already have and the ones that we want to have in the same way that we're thinking about our customers, making sure that we're delivering value to them and making sure that we're using language that really resonates with them. And then on a broader scale, it says get all hands on deck here, because we need to be able to influence our colleagues, the people who are not in HR, not in marketing possibly, and tell them how important this is to be thinking about employee experience and putting ourselves in potential candidates' shoes so that we're able to get the talent we need first, but then continue doing that so we can keep people.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that a little bit, one of my favorite stories here is this has happened multiple times. Working with the Kazoo platform, people are allowed to do sort of socialized employee rewards and employee recognition at their organizations. But what they didn't really think of, that's great for improving their internal culture, but they weren't really thinking that as a way to improve their sort of external story. And so we started pointing out that look at the kinds of recognition that people are writing or creating that's being socialized within your organization. Like, there's so many opportunities for you to sort of elevate that. And of course, with people's permission, add it to your recruiting efforts. Like, here are the kinds of things people are accomplishing at this company that they're getting recognized for. And we'll see a lot of companies easily, in a very low cost way, boost their recruiting efforts and help their recruiting story just by doing that. Sometimes we've even seen them go on and get sort of nominated for rewards or awards within their industry because those stories sort of start to come to the surface. So whether you do it with Kazoo or someone else, like, you probably have little stories like that trapped in your existing recognition program, things people are being rewarded for. Very easy to sort of tap into those aspects of your programs and bring those things to the surface and sort of get more people involved than just the recruiting team to do that, right? So it's sort of a great anecdote to the sort of all hands on deck example.
Yep. Yeah, that's really good.
Okay. I hope everyone who answered recruiting at the top is paying attention there. Overall, though, those are our 4 anti-trends. We've already gone through them today. So as we start to wrap, I did want to throw out another quick poll. Of the 4 that we covered, which anti-trend area that we just saw and talked about, or do you think you're most interested in addressing soon? Like I said, we sort of geek out on everything related to the employee experience here. So just as, kind of professionals ourselves, we're kind of curious, but we're also hoping people are carrying some momentum into 2020. So we're going to throw that poll up on the screen. And remember, it's, the HR analytics, learning and development. We talked about getting those Z-shaped skills, those generational differences, how we address, how we think about those, or the recruiting and retention side. Awesome. Those recruiting people were paying attention. I love it. Mashing that letter D. Great. And the HR analytics, if you're interested in that, we do have a lot of great follow-up discussions we could have there. So, feel free to drop something in the questions area, and we'd be happy to follow up with some great resources related to that if you want, if nothing else. Awesome.
There's also really a good blog post up on the Kazoo site with 18 HR analytics. So that has more information than we have time to talk about today. It can be a good resource for later.
Yep, that's one came out fairly recently. Another great piece to look up. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to jump back in and start to wrap up. Again, I'm Skylar, got Elizabeth here. Really thank everybody for sort of paying attention. I know, Holly, you've got some wrap-up information for everybody.
All right, Skylar, thanks so much. I sure do, but before we get there, we've got about 5, maybe 6 minutes left for some Q&A, so I think we can get to just a couple. So first question that we have today came in from Cindy, and she says that when you talk about evolving recruiting, what kinds of mistakes are others making when it comes to the employer brand?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this one.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. I'll follow up.
First thing that comes to mind for me is, again, we sort of ask you to put on that marketing hat, right? And one thing I see over and over is that a lot of times the sort of story of your culture or your mission or the impact you're making is trapped right under the surface of the organization. People are there, they're experiencing it. But then I go over to your careers page, and yes, we know that we have to get the job listings out there, but it seems like a technical writer almost listed out, what the job's going to be doing and those sort of bullet points under it. I know that that's the most important part, but again, step out of your bubble and assume that I didn't learn everything about you and your culture and your organization before I went to that careers page, right? If I'm showing up and I'm seeing a wall of text and I'm seeing a lot of just, sort of succinct bullet points about all the things I'm being asked to do in that job, not doing a great job at sort of telling me the story of what the impact of this position is going to be or how it contributes to the overall mission. So it's sort of an easy, I think, sort of missed opportunity. Could be as simple as, just running those job listings by a copywriter you have at the company or double checking with someone involved with PR, communications, marketing, or something like that. How can we spice this up a little bit? Because again, it's trapped in our heads how great that person's going to be when they get here. We're just not telling that story on sort of the recruiting page. That's kind of one, I think, sort of short-term, sort of easy evolution that you can make to your recruiting process.
Yep, exactly. And I would add really briefly to that, such a good question, that one of the basics in marketing, the first principle that good marketers do is think about their audience. Who are they and where are they? So if you're looking for a 50-year-old such and such for a position, don't advertise for it on Snapchat. That's a kind of extreme example, but who are they and where are they? Start to build those employee profiles and then go where they are. If you're using Indeed, a lot of us do, and you're not getting a lot of traction and you decide that you want to use social media, if you're looking for a younger person, use Instagram. If you're doing maybe someone with 15 or 20 years work experience and you want to use socials, go to Facebook or LinkedIn. People are on different places. And so that's kind of what we mean about putting your marketing hat on. Think about your audience, who they are and where they are, and change your tactics up if you're not already putting the information out where they are.
Absolutely. Tried and true advice right at the top of anything you're thinking of recruiting-wise. Know your audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great advice from you both. Thanks so much. I think we might have time for one more question. This one's going to come from Maggie. She says that her company does have an LMS, but the adoption is low. So how can she convince others that they need to change or invest more in it?
Yeah, I don't mind quickly touching on this, Elizabeth. And I got into it just for a second earlier in the webcast, but our recommendation there, because it is frustrating to make that investment and see people sort of not using it, our recommendation there is to start sort of with a pulse survey. Maybe you do the whole organization, or maybe you just test within a certain department. But sort of ask them what's working or not working, like get a little bit of feedback about the existing LMS, right? Or you might have some ideas for things that you want to introduce, that might be sort of soft skill related, and sort of gauge interest in those, like sort of like the poll we just did, right? And from that, if you're taking that advice and then slowly, sort of adding things or augmenting your LMS, or maybe opening up that LMS budget to do things like books, conferences, whatever, again, you're saying that clear picture to people that, we're listening, we know that these are things that motivate you, so we're adding them to the program. And because it's, again, something that people are clamoring for, that participation is going to go up. The motivation to sort of use it is going to go up. And also just, sort of people are going to rally around it. So just having that awareness and then sort of applying some of that feedback you're getting to actual change towards it is where I like to tell people to start.
All right. Thanks, Skylar. Anything you want to add, Elizabeth, before we start to wrap up?
I don't think so. I would give the same advice, honestly, with the LMS platforms. It can be hard to get the adoption, but getting feedback is always a good idea.
All right, perfect, guys. Thanks so much. And so we'll first start up to let everyone know that today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. You'll want to take a little bit of a different route to find these this time. They'll be put into the Q&A box that, again, you'll find underneath the webcast video player. They'll also be emailed out to you within about 24 to 48 hours. So we'll close with one more big thank you to Skylar, Elizabeth, and everyone over at Kazoo. We hope everyone has a really great day.